Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Weekly Academics, and you are listening to Faiza Inamdar. And I am back with the fifth and the last part of First War of Independence, that is the War of 1857, that is the results and consequences of the war. And as I had said in the earlier podcast of the military causes, which included the immediate causes, this one's a long one, so I won't take much time. Before this, if you've not heard to the podcast I've made earlier, please go and check out the podcast of the first 4 parts, that is political causes, social and religious causes, economic causes, and military causes. Because if you've listened to those podcasts, it will be easier to understand the results and consequences of the war. So let's dive into it. So as we discussed all the causes, we discussed the immediate cause, and we came to a point where the war had practically started. And then there are the events of a war. As I said, there are 3 C's: cause, course, and consequence. So the course part of it, you can use various resources to read through it, but it is not there in the ICSE syllabus. I will make certain Instagram posts regarding the course of this war that you can refer to. But as of your syllabus, the course is not a part of your syllabus. So therefore, this part 5 will be on the consequences of the war. So let's begin then. The number 1 consequence, and the biggest consequence, is that there was the end of the rule of the company. That means the rule of the company was now given into the hands of the Queen. The end of company's rule and changes introduced in the administrative setup. So as the war ended, the East India Company's rule, it was the East India Company who was doing the administration in the country. But then after the war, the crown, that is the Queen, realized that it was not really safe enough to let a company rule over such a vast country. And therefore, they took the administration into their hands. So now an act was passed for the better government of India on the 2nd August of 1858. And according to this act, there were 5 major changes. Number 1 was that the Act of 1858 transferred the government of India from the company to the crown. So this basically means that now India would be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty and not by the East India Company. Okay, that's the number 1, that the Act of 1858 transferred the government of India from the company to the crown. Second is the company's board of control and court of directors was abolished. And instead of the board of control and court of directors, their powers were transformed or transferred to a cabinet ministry. A cabinet of ministers was set up, and their powers were transferred to the cabinet minister, who was known as the Secretary of State for India. So this cabinet minister, who would now have the powers like the company board of control and the court of directors, was the Secretary of State to India. Okay, so that was the second change, that the board of control and court of directors was abolished. The third was the Secretary of State was to be assisted by India's Council, an India Council consisting of 15 members. So now they abolished the company's board of control and court of directors and established a Secretary of State. So this Secretary of State would have 15 members, a council of 15 members, which would be the India Council, and they would assist this Secretary of State. But the counterpart to this is, this all seems to be very good in the face of it, but the counterpart of this is that all the payments and allowances of these members of the council or the Secretary of the State or any public servant who comes from England into India, his payment, his allowances and salary go from the revenue of India and not from the revenue of England. It goes from the revenue of India, and their allowances used to be really high. Okay. The fourth thing was the appointment of civil services. So the appointment of civil services was made open. It was changed and it was made through open competition. And the rules of this open competition were to be made up by the Secretary of the State with consultation of the Council. So the exams that we have today, the Union Public Service Commission or the State Public Service Commissions, what you call as UPSC or the State Public Service Commissions, Okay, so all these exams are actually drawn from this concept of having an open competition for all the civil services. That was the fourth change. And the fifth change, the last important change made by the Act of 1858, was that the Governor General received an additional title of Viceroy. This means that the Governor General would now officially be the representative of the Crown in India, which means that he would be the Viceroy. Okay, that is, the Government of General received an extra title or an additional title of Viceroy. So this Queen's Proclamation, which had all these things, so this Queen's Proclamation was incorporated all these changes, and it was made public in Allahabad on the 1st of November 1858 by Lord Canning. And Lord Canning thus became the first Governor General and Viceroy of India. Okay, that's the number one change, that is the end of the rule of company and the changes introduced in the administrative setup. Now, the second consequence of the war is the policy towards India's princes and chiefs. So earlier, you remember the doctrine of lapse, which was there in the political causes, and all the various changes done in respective the princes. The treaties were not honored and stuff was that happened. Now the Queen tried to just make it all right. How? So the Queen declared that Queen Victoria, okay, so this is Queen Victoria, in her proclamation again in 1858, she declared that the government would not annex any more Indian states. She also declared that all the treaties that had been signed, that had been concluded with the company, would still be honored. Okay, so if the treaty is signed one side by the company, then the treaty would still be honored. Okay, and she also said that the adoption and succession would be recognized. So the doctrine of lapse, it did not recognize a succession if the heir was adopted. She said that it would be recognized. The right of adoption and succession would also be recognized. But again, there is a catch. That at the same time, when she is giving all these things, that no more Indian states would be annexed and all the treaties would be honored and the adoption rights and succession rights would be honored, the troops will still be limited. And if you see at this particular point, the Peshwa rule has ended because Nana Sahib was not accepted to be the heir, and he was not even given the pension. Okay, and he had, because he was an important part of the war, he'd also run off into the jungles. He'd fled into the jungles of Nepal. So the Peshwa rule ended. Also, Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled to Rangoon, and there he died also. So the Mughal dynasty also ended over here. So now what was left was small individual kingdoms, and the Queen honored them, but limited their troops. Now, coming on to the third consequence, which is the reorganization of army. Now, we had read in the military causes that there was a disproportion between the Indian soldiers and the British soldiers. So now the Queen, she started to follow a policy of balance and counter check. This was adopted by the new governing system. And in this system, they first of all, they increased the proportion of British soldiers to Indian soldiers. That means now British soldiers were more than the Indian soldiers. Secondly, the artillery and the effective weapons and the high posts were all exclusively reserved for the British. No Indian could get to a high position or get access to high artillery or weaponry. And the third thing was that they organized the army, reorganized the Indian sepoys such that at one place there were people of different castes and different regions and different classes, so that no feeling of unity arises among them. Earlier, what happened, if we're dealing with Awadh, then we have the army of Awadh having all people from Awadh. But what the Queen did, she mixed it up all over the country. So now every army has people from different class, different caste, different race, different religion, different region. So no feeling of unity should arise among them. These are the three main military stuff that she did. The fourth consequence is the solemn promises made to the people of India. So Queen Victoria, she made certain promises to the people of India. Okay, first of all, these promises were not meant to be kept. They were just to show that they're doing something better. Okay, so these promises were, number one, Queen Victoria, in her proclamation of 1858, she promised not to interfere in the religious beliefs anymore. That was number one. Number two, she promised to give an equal treatment to all her subjects, be it English subject or Indian subjects. And like the exams, it would everything, the recruitment, the appointment would be on the basis of education, ability, integrity, merit, and not a biased basis. So equal treatment to all the subjects. The fourth was the Queen gave an official pardon to all the people except for those who were guilty for a murder of a British subject. So other than people who were guilty for murder of British subject, all were given a pardon, because many were put into the jails just because going against the British rule or something like that. So all those people were granted a official pardon. And the fourth thing that she promised was, as per the proclamation, she promised that the material and moral advancement of the people would be the main concern of the government henceforth. So the four promises were not to interfere in the religious beliefs, give equal treatment to all the subjects, an official pardon, and the material and moral advancement would be the most important or the main concern henceforth. But as I said, all these promises were not meant to be kept. And also there was a side effect to this, because when she says that she won't interfere into the religious beliefs, the good changes that were made by the earlier people, like the abolition of sati done by Lord William Bentinck in 1829, the abolition of sati, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act of 1856, these were certain good changes that happened. But now the orthodox thought process would take up, conservative elements would gain grounds now, because the Queen promised not to interfere into the religious beliefs. Right? These were the four important promises that she made. Fifth, the very important thing that people did not realize at the point was the policy of divide and rule. So now the Queen started to follow a policy of divide and rule, and she did this divide and rule in two major ways. So one is between the prince, chiefs and the subjects, and second is on a religious basis, that is the Hindu and Muslim divide. So what the government now did was, they tried to create a rift between the princes or the chiefs and their subjects, that is the ordinary people. They tried to gain support of the princes, they tried to make them loyal towards themselves, and thus they would do whatever the British would ask them to. So their subjects would no longer be happy with them. So there was a rift between the prince and their subjects, okay, or the ordinary masses. And second, they tried to create a rift between the Hindus and Muslims. So as I had mentioned in the political causes also, Bahadur Shah Zafar was respected throughout the country. He was considered to be like the leader of the entire war of 1857, even by Hindu leaders like Lana Sahib or Tata Tope. Okay, so what the Britishers did, they first tried to take all the Hindus towards their side, and so the Muslims would get alienated. They created misunderstandings. But then later on they realized that Hindu nationalism was growing and they did not really like it, so they took the sides of the Muslims now. And with this, they tried to create a misunderstanding and they applied the policy of divide and rule. So in this there were two divides done, that is between the princes were turned against their own people, and second was the rift between the Hindus and the Muslims. Okay. Sixth point now, one another important and major point, that is the economic exploitation done on the Indians. So India now became a free field for economic exploitation, okay, a free field for economic exploitation. And earlier India was exploited just by the company. Now the entire British Empire was there to exploit the country, okay. So number one way of economic exploitation is that the number of Englishmen in India, both private individuals and the members of service, were to be paid. First of all, the number was increased. Like we saw, the military men increased to make it more proportionate. Then there was the Secretary of the State, and then the 15-member council to assist the Secretary of the State, and all these things increased. So Englishmen coming to India as public servants increased, and all their payment was supposed to go from the Indian revenue. So this was a drain to the Indian revenue. Okay, that was one thing. All the Secretary of the State, civil servants, military officers, all their allowances and salary went from the Indian revenue. Second was, India became a dumping ground for their manufactured goods manufactured in England, because as we studied in the economic causes of the war, the tariff rates were very disproportionate. Import duties, export duties, we studied that. So according to that, India became a good market for it. It became actually a dumping ground for the goods manufactured in England. Third one was, there was a rapid rise in indebtedness of the peasants. because we had talked about the indigo plantation also in the economic causes. So this indigo planters, they did a huge revolt also in 1866 to 68. But then because of all the Englishmen, more Englishmen coming to India and settling in India, the indebtedness of the peasants increased rapidly. And the fourth economic exploitation was that the British invested a surplus amount of money in India in the sector of railways, coal mines, jute mills, shipping, etc. All the extra or the convenience sectors, you can say. So they invested a lot in these sectors, and then when they invested so much of money, they demanded that much of interest on these goods. So the common people had to pay huge amounts for these goods. So that way, again, a drain to the Indian economy. So there is this drain theory that we'll be coming across later on when we go through the later on chapters. But just keep this in mind. So when we come to drain theory, you can just click yourself that, yeah, this is something that happened in the causes of 1857 War of Independence. Okay. So these are the four ways of economic exploitation: the salaries, India becoming a dumping ground, the indigo peasants, and the high interest that the people had to pay because of high investments. Okay. Now, the seventh reason, another important reason, was the rise of nationalism. So another important cause, another important result, a positive result, was the rise of nationalism. So after all this happened, the War of 1857, after it finally ended, people in India realized that yes, they could at least weaken it. Okay. Now there are certain failures to this also that are also mentioned in certain textbooks. You can go through them. But in spite of all these failures, people in India understood that they had power enough to defeat the Britishers. If they worked hard on it, they had enough power. There was a rise in nationalism, the nationalistic feelings. So people like Rani of Jhansi, Tatya Tope were praised. People now started looking up to them as idols. Rani of Jhansi, she became India's Joan of Arc. There were patriotic songs written in them. There were a high amount of patriotism was in the air of India now. Okay, the memory of these people, these brave people fighting, like people like Mangal Pandey, Tatya Tope, Jhansi, Rani of Jhansi, Nana Saheb, Bahadur Shah Zafar, all these people became role models now. And this entire war became a symbol of challenge to the mighty British power in India. So now Indians were inspired that they could win in their struggle against the British Raj, and that was the nationalistic feeling that rose in them. Okay. So what are the important consequences? The end of companies' rule and the changes in the administrative system. Then the policy towards the Indian princes and chiefs, reorganization of the army, solemn promises made to the people of India, policy of divide and rule, the economic exploitation, and the rise of nationalism in India. I know this is a long one, but this is an important one. Questions have been asked very frequently on this section of the chapter. Most recently in 2018, questions have been asked on this. So pay good attention to this part. It is important. It is very easy. If you just have good recap of the causes, it is very easy to understand the consequences. Okay. So just revise good the causes. For that, you have my podcasts available. That is political causes, economic causes, military causes, social and religious causes. All are available. You could refer to those. And until then, to listen to something soothing, beautiful and nice, you can always go to Your Life in My Voice by Dr. Faiza Inamdar. And yes, like the podcast, share it with all your friends, help them out also. Share it with all your friends who are in grade 9 right now, because it's going to help them a lot also. And subscribe the YouTube channel Faiza Inamdar for continuous updates for all the podcasts. All are available on YouTube. Some are also there on IGTV, but not all. You can always DM me at weekly.academics if you have any doubts or if you want me to make any podcasts on specific content. For doubts, you can also put your doubts in the comment section on YouTube, or I am very open to get your feedbacks to know what you want me to do podcasts on more. So put it down in the comment section in YouTube and subscribe the channel Faiza Inamdar. Follow me on Instagram at weekly.academics, and I'll get back to you with the next chapter. So this chapter is done. I'll get back to you with the next chapter. That will be the factors leading to the growth of nationalism and foundation of Indian National Congress. But that will be after a gap because I have certain exams to look forward to right now. And until then, you're listening to Faiza Inamdar at Weekly Academics. Take care. Bye bye. Be healthy. Be safe. Be at home. Bye.